Welcome everybody to Collegio Carlo Alberto. I am Pietro Garibaldi. I'm here on behalf of Giorgio Barba Navaretti and the chairman of the Collegio. And my role here is just to welcome you and thank you for being here and being with us today. So it's going to be an intensive day on key topics for the Collegio, not only for the Collegio, but for the country as a whole. Now, I guess we have also people connected. Is everything working fine with the remote? Shall we go on? Okay. So welcome also to people who are attending online. Now, the topic of today is financing sustainable infrastructure, and we are very happy to host it at the Collegio Carlo Alberto. The Collegio Carlo Alberto is technically a foundation, but is a venture of Compagnia di San Paolo and the University of Torino. And we have been working on long-term issues and structural issues of the Italian economy and the global economy for almost 20 years now. And the topics that you are going to discuss today, it's one of the key topics. And of course, I'm not here as an economist, but I am an economist. And as such, it's obvious that long-term investment is one of the key issues that you also will study at the Collegio. Among other things that I do in the Collegio, I'm also the director of a think tank, which is called LTI at Unito, which is the University of Torino, and is hosted inside the Collegio. Is an initiative that is actually part of the sponsored by Compagnia di San Paolo and other private investors, and some are here, and we thank you. There is Fondaco, there are Intesa San Paolo, there is Reale Mutuo, there is Equiter, and other sponsors, and of course we need to thank them. Now, long-term investment, just before going the floor, I guess, and start things, is a key issue. Let me say one macroeconomic comment only, in the sense that now we are in a particular moment in terms of the overall economic situation, because in a post-pandemic in a post-pandemic situation, we have this huge program of long-term investment, potentially thanks to the EU Generation Fund. But let me remind you that until 2019, 2020, particularly the public infrastructure, Italy was one of the main problems of Italy was actually the decline of total spending in capital goods, and public investment fell from 5%. It was 20 years ago. In 2019, I was checking, it was around 35 billion, which is no more than 2% of GDP, which was among the lowest value in the EU. So it's clearly now with the pandemic and the Next Generation Fund, there is a vibrant moment for long-term investment, but the financing of long-term investment is a problem that is there to stay. And beyond the EU Generation Fund, it's very much key. And I guess that the only long-term solution is some form of public-private compromise and public-private initiative. So I guess these are part of the things that will be discussed today, but so I just thank you once more, and my role here is just giving the floor and move on in this first session. And so the order is we follow the order of, and I give the floor to Ferdinando Nelli Feroce as president and as also organizing, and we thank Yai for being with us. Please, Ferdinando.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you to this conference, which is devoted, as you have heard, to the question of how to finance sustainable infrastructure in a long-term perspective. Conference is organized by the Istituto Affari Internazionali in collaboration with the Compagnia di San Paolo, and is also one of the numerous events which the Istituto Affari Internazionali has promoted in the context of the T20. For those of you that are not familiar with T20, just few words to remind you that T20 is a group or network of international think tanks, which meets all along the year with the objective of providing policy recommendations to the G20. So we are one of the several advocacy groups that, in a sense, collaborate with the G20. First of all, I would like to thank Francesco Profumo, President of Compagnia di San Paolo, not only for the support that he has provided to the organization of this event, but in particular for the work that he has done in his quality as lead co-chair of the task force on infrastructure investment as part of the numerous task force of the G20. He has had a very complex, complicated task that he has performed in a very brilliant manner. I hope that he will forgive me if we have asked him to do this job, but I think it has been of interest also for him and for the Compagnia di San Paolo. And also a warm thanks to the Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo and for those colleagues of the Compagnia that have contributed to the organization of this event. As I said, today's webinar objective is that of enriching a debate on how to promote, in particular, private investment in sustainable infrastructure. Because we know that tackling public and private infrastructure finance gaps with the objective of promoting sustainable and resilient infrastructure is a key policy area. And this is why the task force this year has particularly focused its attention on this subject. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic is having a strong impact across country, within countries. It has in particular partly accelerated existing trends, but it's also contributed to the creation of new challenges. And by the way, one of the challenges that we are facing as a consequence of COVID-19 is the need to increase the level of sustainable and the number of sustainable infrastructure investment to support the global recovery. So the COVID-19 emergency has showed that the recovery should be focused on building a more inclusive and sustainable future to provide through this new sustainable infrastructure a strong support for economic growth. By the way, it is estimated that a 1% GDP increase in public investment in advanced economies and in emerging markets has the potential to increase overall GDP in the long run by 2.7%, and also to generate a surge in private investment of the order of about 10%, and to create something between 20 to 33 million jobs, directly, of course, or indirectly. Adequate public infrastructure that would include also social infrastructure, such as schools, hospitals, is crucial to combat the negative effects of external shocks like the one we have had with COVID-19. Furthermore, as it is recognized by the United Nations in the context of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, well-functioning and resilient infrastructures are the foundation of a successful community and a prerequisite to achieve a fair but also a sustainable long-term growth. However, and this is the point which will be at the center of our discussion today, according to the Global Infrastructure Outlook, which is a G20 initiative, the gap between the current trends and the needed infrastructure investment in the coming 20 years amounts to something like $15 trillion. 15 trillion US dollars is the amount calculated of the gap between the necessities and the reality. And I'm thinking of renovation of existing infrastructures, investment in new projects, and long-term management and maintenance that all require important, significant financial resources, both public but also private. And we also know that if public investment, both from governments and public international institutions, are necessary, they are essential, but they are not sufficient. Because given the exceptional strain on public finances generated by the recent crisis, the participation of the private sector is a necessary more than ever, is a necessary component of this global effort. But we know that, and this is the point which will have to be discussed today, that there are numerous barriers in many countries, including in particular Italy, by the way, that actually make it difficult for private investment to intervene in the infrastructural sectors. This is why the T20 task force, and in particular today's webinar, will address this problem, or how to overcome these barriers, how to overcome these problems that face those that want to invest, the private sector that wants to invest in infrastructures, in order to create a much more favorable climate for investment in infrastructure to support a global effort in this respect. I'll now stop here, and I conclude by reminding that I very much hope that from this discussion, today's discussion, a number of policy indications and policy recommendations will emerge that could be addressed to our governments so that they could be taken into account in the conclusions of the G20. Thank you very much for your attention. Francesco, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your speech, and thank you for your help during the last month. I remember when we talked the first time, and you asked me if I was interested to be the co-lead chair, and maybe you remember that I said, maybe, but I needed to think a little bit because I'm quite busy. And in the meantime, I was thinking how this work could be the way for the Compagnia di San Paolo to be more and more involved in the infrastructure and to invest in some young people in order to really go on with our general strategy. No. But I think the cooperation between EI and the Compagnia was great. And then I'm very pleased for force me in some way to do this job. Then, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure and an honor to welcome you all today to this T20 conference dedicated to infrastructure financing and sustainability. I want to stress the two words, financing one side and sustainability in the second one. First of all, let me thank the Collegio Carlo Alberto and my friend Pietro Garibaldi and all the staff of the Collegio for hosting us today. They did a great job, and I'm sure that in the future you will remember. Maybe some of you does not know that this was the building of the economical faculty of the University of Torino since 15 years ago, something like this. Yeah. And when I was a student, I remember that I was from the other university, but that it was a very nice place. And look, today, it's really beautiful. And I would like also to express my heartfelt thanks to the Istituto Affari Internazionali, the anchor think tank of the T20 for the Italian presidencies, for their support as a co-organizer of today's event. And then let me also to thank our people from the Compagnia di San Paolo. First of all, Alberto Fossi, that is our General Secretary, but also Paolo Mulassano, that is the Director of the Innovation Direction. But first of all, I think the two young, one lady and one gentleman, Valeria Lauria and Fulvio Bersanetti, that they did a great job supporting me and having a very strong relation with people from IAI. And I think we really invest in a good way. At the end of this experience, we have more experience, more knowledge in our country, I think. And this is a good also for the future. We needed to invest in the long term like this. Then thank you. I'm glad to see such as a wide range of stakeholders ready to debate and exchange views on such an important topic. In my capacity as the lead co-chair of the T20 Task Force on Infrastructure Financing and Investment, I really welcome this inclusive approach and thank you all for joining us. This event promises to be a unique opportunity to share ideas and objectives, as well as a key milestone to set our implementation priorities for the years to come. It may sound like a refrain, but the COVID-19 pandemic has confirmed the key role of infrastructure in crisis management, adaptation, and mitigation. Today, all around the globe, there is an unprecedented demand for more infrastructure spending as a driver to support a post-pandemic sustainable long-term recovery, such as a renovated enthusiasm for infrastructure is easily explained. Investment in infrastructure has an annual multiplier effect of 0.4 to 2.2 times GDP. And it can help to create 10,000 total jobs for every billion US invested. Low and middle income countries alone could see a net benefit of $4 return for every $1 spent. It's clear that the current juncture opens in a one-time window of opportunities. The fact that a boom in infrastructure investment will produce some results does not mean that it will generate good results. To meet economic, social, and environmental expectations, governments and firms must place sustainability at the center of their efforts. Now, more than ever, in front of new opportunities for a sustainable recovery, we can for deep structural reforms to the way infrastructure is financed, built, and managed. In light of the work carried out by the T20 Task Force on Infrastructure Investment and Financing, there are some considerations that I would like to make. The first one is about financing. While public funding will be substantial, this effort will not in itself be sufficient to close the infrastructure gap. The G20 Global Infrastructure Hub estimates a gap at around $640 billion per year until the year 2040. In emerging markets and developing countries, the investment requirements are substantial, especially considering current fiscal constraints. In advanced economies, there is an urgent demand for new funding to ensure security and upgrading of aging infrastructure. Private investors must therefore be called in to share the burden and take a leading role in mobilizing capital, as well as markets for clean and sustainable infrastructures. Yet, macroeconomic risks and weakness in governance remain substantial hindrances for this to happen. The creation for a positive enabling environment is a necessary condition to tap into alternative sources of financing. Given the complex nature of infrastructure investment, it's crucial to find effective means for risk allocation and risk sharing between the public and the private sector. Furthermore, sound policies, effective institution transparencies, and reliable contracts are the key enabling factors to bring stability to infrastructure markets. It's also imperative to work towards an harmonization of metrics and standards, including the development of impact measurements. In the recent year, environmental, social, and governance criteria have been playing an increasingly important role. Financial operators are displaying a growing appetite for financial products that incorporate ESG considerations into infrastructure investment decision-making. The best availability evidence confirms that ESG funds can outperform and achieve better results if compared to traditional funds. Yet, much remains to be done to reorient capital flows towards more sustainable investment options. The lack of a common definition, the lack of a quality data, potential cost considerations, and the heterogeneity of infrastructure are some of the obstacles hindering the wide adoption of these criteria. We need an holistic framework aligning objective and definitions, hence a closer dialogue and exchange among the main stakeholders, comprising governments, institutional investors, asset managers, banks, and contractors, is important to increase the trust and ensure a better coordination. Besides, a better policy and regulatory framework closing the financial gap for sustainable infrastructure investments requires a more robust framework of financial instruments. It's thus essential to look for innovative approaches that are better aligned with the requirements of sustainable and green investments. Ladies and gentlemen, it's evident that financing should be underpinned by stronger commitments to digitalization, decarbonization, and resilience. I wanted to stress first the importance of data and technologies. Data and technologies are formidable alliance in achieving sustainable targets. The sharing of pioneering innovations such as cloud computing, artificial intelligence, digital twins, 5G, and IoT offer great potential to transform how infrastructure is designed and operated and to enhance its productivity, efficiency, and environmental sustainability. More especially, the power of collecting, organizing, and using data is key in the path towards a technologically advanced and flourishing infrastructure ecosystem. In this regard, it will be paramount, first, to integrate digitalization and system modeling through the full life cycle of infrastructure. Second, to strengthen cross-border data management and improve data quality. Third, to promote value chain integration through the use of federated digital platforms. Let me also emphasize the significance of low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure. The transition towards a net zero emission economy represents one of the most important and topical economic transitions in human history. This transition will require, above all, that firms in many industries change their production technology to more carbon neutral options. Building sustainability responses call also for new tools for mainstreaming adaptation and mitigation into planning and management. We need to foster policy actions to accelerate the transition toward decarbonization and circular economy to promote higher biodiversity standards and to improve the life cycle of infrastructure projects. This brings me to resiliencies, the final point of my talk. The pandemic is making evident that the crisis-related costs can be much higher than incremental costs, such as those linked with a systematic investment in resiliency and maintenance. In front of a scenario marked by natural hazard and severe climate change effects, the implementation of a well-maintained and resilient infrastructure increases asset life and reduces operation and management costs, promoting new and innovative financing solutions, as well as advocating for standardized ratings with incorporate maintenance and resilience principles in infrastructure projects are necessary steps for building genuinely high-quality infrastructure in the next future. As a job creator, a revenue producer, and source of economic vitality, there are only a few economy sectors that can compete with infrastructure. Harnessing private sector capital and expertise and looking at the innovations and the new technologies for the recovery and post-recovery phase of the pandemic are the priorities for boosting economic activities and for meeting social and environmental goals. At such a historical juncture, I look forward to a fruitful and constructive discussions on the future of infrastructure, financing, and sustainability. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Profumo and President Nelly Ferrocci and Pietro Garibaldi for those introductions. It's a real pleasure to be here also today for this very important discussion. The good news is that we are very much on time to continue our discussion, so that's absolutely perfect. Let me just give you very quickly, because we are here physically in Torino in the Collegio Carlo Alberto and online, right? I see people following us from India, from Argentina, so on both ends of the time spectrum and elsewhere. So welcome very much. Welcome, a warm welcome to Torino online too. For this reason, I'm just technically, only the speaker should have his mic on, otherwise it seems it blurs the sound for the people who are online. So we will have in a minute keynote addresses from Paolo Calcagnini from the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, Deputy General Manager and Chief Business Officer, and Rodolfo Errore, President of Srce. I hope the pronunciation is okay. And then we will have two panel discussions on two equally important topics, infrastructure financing instruments, and financing resilience, a new business model for sustainable infrastructure, which will echo and deepen the elements which have been displayed in these series of opening statements. And then we will have two closing remarks from Alberto Anfossi, Secretary General of Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, one of the hosts of this meeting, together with Istituto for International Affairs, and Ettore Greco, who is the Executive Vice President of EIE. Let me just finish this series of introductions by saying that this is a T20 roundtable, so it is part of these sessions that have been organized ahead of the summit of the T20 as a very important, it's a simple session, but it's also a very important session to convey strong messages in times where, as was reminded by President Profumo a minute ago, infrastructure investments are much needed, more complicated, maybe than before, because we are in conditions of stress with challenges and opportunities linked with the environment, also with the society, and powerful transformations not just in Europe, but the world over, and digitalization also comes as a catalyst for changes. So with no further notice, if you allow me, we will wrap up this round of opening statements, and I will now leave the floor to Rodolfo Errore, who is physically here with us, and Paolo Calcagni, I think, who's online. So welcome, Paolo, Deputy General Manager and Chief Business Officer of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, for the first keynote address of this afternoon session.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and try to give our contribution as Cassa Depositi. So when we, to analyze the topic, we need to ask ourselves two questions. The number one is, what are the new infrastructures that will be needed in the future? And the second question is how we plan to finance debt in a context of high public debt, especially in some countries. Now, for the sake of the argument, we can split infrastructure in two groups. Number one is the traditional infrastructure, mostly brownfield. So we're talking about existing infrastructure that may need an upgrade, but they exist. I'm talking about energy grids, water, roads, railroads, etc. And we can argue, for the sake of the argument, obviously, so I'm pushing it a bit too far, that those are cases where the evaluation of the benefits and the financing of the infrastructure is easier, because we know those infrastructure, we know how they works, we can evaluate the benefits. So in relative terms, it's easier to find answers on how to finance those infrastructure in the future. Now, the problem comes with new infrastructures. So when with new infrastructures, I refer to all those social infrastructures, possibly greenfield, where that are supposed to give answers to some trends, social and economic trends that have been accelerated by the COVID-19. I'm thinking about the aging population, about the need of territorial healthcare, the change of the family structure, the family composition, including the fact that families are not a safety net anymore, the women's inclusion in the workforce, the reskilling of the labor force. Those are all needs that are relatively new, and the infrastructures that we need to develop obviously pose additional problems under two dimensions. Number one is the project evaluation, because we cannot rely on pure economic factors, because environmental and social benefits play a critical role in investment decisions. And this is especially true if public money is involved. And so we can argue that financial sustainability is not a necessary condition, a sufficient condition for realizing those infrastructures, but it's more a necessary condition rather than a sufficient condition. And the assessment of the ESG impact of those infrastructures need to be based on a robust and standardized, as much as possible, methodologies. Likewise, we do the same with financial evaluation. So to push the argument a bit ahead, but we should go in the same direction. So having a standardized methodologies to understand what infrastructures create the highest benefits. The second question is how to create a combination of public and private resources. Now, most of the infrastructures developed in the past century were based on public debt, or if not debt, on public resources. Now, this model doesn't appear sustainable anymore, and it's quite straightforward why, especially in countries like Italy, where the public debt has reached a level where we need to find a mix of private and public resources. Now, and I agree that public-private schemes can provide a valuable answer to the problem. Now, If we want to be to make PPPs widely used, we need to target some of those gaps that have limited the use of PPP schemes so far, and I can list at least four gaps. Number one is the technical competencies within the public administration, especially at local levels, because evaluating a PPP is way more complicated compared to evaluating a traditional public tender to realize an infrastructure. The second is to mitigate the risk profile of some public entities whose creditworthiness is weaker compared to other entities. The reason being that the availability fees that are supposed to repay the cost of the infrastructures obviously are based on the trust that investors and financiers have on each specific entity, and the situation, especially in our country, is very diverse. There are situations where this is easier and situations where it's harder. And if we want to crowd private investors in, we need to find a smart way to mitigate the risk in those situations. The third element is to provide financial support, not only in terms of covering the initial investments, like happens today, but also the future availability fees that the administration is supposed to pay to cover the investments. Finally, when we talk about greenfield infrastructures, the investment period for private investors is very long. So in many cases, financial investors don't want to, are happy to take the financial risk. They're not happy to take the full construction risk of the infrastructure, especially for those infrastructure whose construction can be as long as 5, 6, or even longer. And so we need to think about schemes that may facilitate the investment by private investors, but covering part of the construction risk that otherwise would not be acceptable from a purely financial standpoint. So this is in a nutshell. I mean, the key elements that, in my view, need to be addressed if we want to facilitate the crowding in of private investors and make those social infrastructures that will be largely needed available in 15, 20, or 30 years' time.
Thank you very much, Paolo Calcagnini. Maybe just before we go on with Rodolfo Errore, two questions, and you pick up the one which you prefer, I would say. You have insisted on different aspects, and especially this question of the critical role of the local level as also a driver to implement transformations, right? So in this regard, what would be the key aspects of implementing, I would say, nationally or at a European level, long-term investments that would leverage change in all regions, I would say in all cities, irrespective of the differences that sometimes and the imbalances that have sometimes enlarged during the COVID-19 crisis. And related to that, how to use the PPP framework, and this will be addressed also later in our discussion, to meet the growing needs to renewed social infrastructure. Could you give us just very briefly, maybe a couple of indications of where to go?
Sure, thanks for the answer. So as I said before, the two questions that need to be answered are what infrastructure are needed in the long term and how they can be financed. Now, to the first question, the idea of developing a coordinated approach at European level can be beneficial in many aspects. Number one, it it would help to define common priorities, or at least to make countries converge on a shared list of critical infrastructures, and so reducing differences across countries. And second is the possibility to develop a common framework for the evaluation of social and environmental benefits that would create the same playing field for all countries. When it comes to PPP, your second question, I think that the idea of building competence centers within the public administration that could be able to support even small local authorities, public authorities, to evaluate PPP projects may put those administrations in the condition to fully evaluate the alternative between a traditional tender or a PPP scheme, and by that increasing the percentage of infrastructure that are realized also through private resources.
Thank you so much for these elements. I will now turn to Rodolfo, President of Srce, who has played a major role during the crisis in the past months, especially in supporting companies and guaranteeing investments. The floor is yours, Rodolfo.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to Mr. Bouchot for giving me the floor. First of all, I would like to thank, of course, Francesco Profumo, the President Nelly Feroci, and Professor Garibaldi, and I cordially greet Paolo Calcagnini, who preceded me on stage with a very brilliant speech. Today, I would like to focus my speech on the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. This is repeatedly and recalled in recent months by institutions, companies, and all the actors of the economic world, a unique opportunity for our country system, and which places Italy in front of one opportunity that cannot be missed. Too many times in the past, Italy has focused on overcoming current and economic problems. For too many years, public investment, and in some phases even private one, have not kept pace with the international standards, causing a gradual deterioration of physical capital, especially infrastructural, environmental, historical, cultural, geological, and hydric. Today, with the PNRR, Italy is facing a structural change and creating with a concept that in perhaps now overused is a new model of development. My personal opinion is very easy. In my opinion, PNRR is in fact must not be treated only as a financial event. It is an opportunity. It is a great opportunity to modernize the country, to recover decades of infrastructure and environmental deterioration. It's an opportunity to say the technological challenge by digitalizing the country. It's an opportunity to concretely implement sustainability, and is an opportunity to overcome inequalities, because unfortunately in our country, there are many inequalities. I believe that with the PNRR, Italy is once again investing in itself and in its future. Go to the numbers, not to be just, philosophic, but to have a proactive approach. As you know, maybe the plan provides for the grounding on investment 191 billion euro, which will be financed through the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and for 30 billion, which will be financed through national resources. At the end of the day, we have our disposal 222 billions. The resources will be allocated, as you know, to 6 missions, which correspond to subject area of intervention divided in 16 components with investment and reforms. First, question, how to structure the financial balance of the PNRR projects? This places Italy in front of a great decision making challenge, namely to seek the best solution to combine the three elements of the financial balance: investment, current public spending, and debt. A traditional structure with a balanced ratio between a debt and repayable fund, in which private and in particular capital markets and financial institutions are, and at the first time of the analysis of the plan, not adequately involved, could lead to a non-optimal use of the PNRR fund. An approach closer to structured finance based on project finance, also interpreting the idea that came from company and financial market, could instead represent the way to go. Specific resources from the recovery fund should not be used to replace private investment and in fact conflict with their involvement. Instead, they should act as a flywheel and incentive to invest in those infrastructure projects which by their nature, for example, too long or too high risk, do not meet the classic requirement of bankability and do not guarantee a solid return for private investors. To give you an order of magnitude, it is estimated that about 42%, roughly 93 billion euro of the investment envisaged by the PNRR refer to potential bankable projects. In which sectors? Digitalization, green infrastructure, and sustainable mobility. By using the private partnership, as Paolo said before, we could obtain a multiplier effect of the PNRR, guaranteeing, as allowed by the public contract code, a public contribution up to 45% of the total investment value for the work end, and the remaining 51% an intervention of institutional investors. Going concretely into details, essentially we should make in place 4 points. First, an analysis of the projects included in the PNRR that can generate cash flow, because cash flow is something very interesting for investors, domestic and international. An analysis of the financing gap of the projects, the promotion of an international financial table for the concrete activation of synergy with the markets. Because as you know, we discussed right now without a concrete approach or proactive approach. What we should do is in concrete build an international table where we want to run the table, all the counterparts, including the investors. A possible integration of the plan with the guarantees, and in this case, the rule of our company. One flash about the methodology that we can use. I believe that this is therefore a question of adopting blending financing as a possible solution. Why blending financing? Because what are the advantages of this systemic approach when we have private and public and blending approach? If one deal is bankable, we use a small piece of public contribution. If the deal is not bankable, we use a more piece of public contribution and less piece from private markets. Which is the advantage of this systemic approach? A funding optimization would be achieved only if the involvement of the market players, banks, funds, debt funds, insurance, foundation, and patient investors like, for example, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. In projects where a significant share of cash flow is foreseen, the public-private synergy would determine a leverage effect, a leverage that we could even reach at 2 per leverage. Just to give you an example, the money that we can flow to the market are 222 billions, and the return in terms of the economics in the years are 200 billions. That means that the relation is 1-to-1 We spend 200 and we receive in terms of economics effects 200. This is a huge number. If you consider last year or 2 years ago, we're looking for 1 billion to achieve, you know, the internal financing balance sheets, because we have the fiscal compact of 3%. That's if you say 200 billion of investment, 200 billion of return are incredible, but we could do better than this if we apply the leverage mechanism that can go in the relation 1/2. 200 billions of investment, 400 billions of return. That's the advantage of the blending financing. And what will happen if the condition, and I finish my speech on the PNRR, if I have time also to the rule of Srce, please. What will happen if the condition were not met to make the PPP intervention a systemic model? Probably the market would move with the cherry picking or adverse selection approach, in which only the most profitable projects will be chosen by banks and financial institutions. That's what we can do, is you make in place a systemic approach, because markets cannot expect, you know, public, you know. If you are, you know, a super large bank, maybe you can go seeing the PNRR and choice which is the most profitable single deal on the projects. That's why is it the time that we have to work in terms of a system and not, you know, in terms of deal to deal. To conclude, a synergic and systemic approach appears to be, in my opinion, the best choice at the moment, because a better synergy between public and private would combine the specific skills of the both party, making the most of experience of the private sector in allocating resources, managing costs, and respecting deadlines, and that's of the public sector in terms of supervision and policy. That's my point of view of you know, PNRR and the opportunity for Italy.
Thank you very much, Rodolfo and Rory. And we are not talking here about small amounts, right? But about really historic amounts, maybe unprecedented amounts since the end of the World War II or even before. So everything which is being discussed is highly structuring for the future, right? I've got, maybe if you allow me, two questions about those aspects. The first one is regarding somehow the complexity of how to manage on the ground, project by project, either public sources of funding, PPPs, or blended finance. How to make sure that time is not lost, right, in reaching out to these goals. Should the solutions be national again, right? National plans after national plans? Should there be regional? I'm thinking here about the European Union, and are the mechanisms sufficient? And if we expand, there was a question or a reference in the chat about the G20 and guidelines about connectivity and so on. How do you think, for example, good practices or examples such as Italy could be shared widely so that at G20 level, good sets of solutions with converging impacts from public banks, private banks, in all the sources of finance can be maximized?
Thank you for the question. You know, I would like to be very, very easy to say one very simple concept. First, you know, Italy and Europe, you know, we have, you know, a strong tradition in the infrastructure, in particular in the execution of the projects. Please consider that in the last maybe 15 years, 20, 50 years, a large part of the infrastructure project were, you know, delivered by project finance. And maybe the concession is something, to be honest, old, you know. They contractors, the investors, the banks are, you know, familiar and able to consider, you know, cooperation in this in the delivery of the infrastructure, because there is a fantastic culture in Italy and Europe about project finance and project bond, and also quite good experience where the investors, the banks and the fund are shareholder of the SPV. That could be, you know, the contractors. That's, you know, I'm quite confident about this culture. And of course, I must be optimist because I'm, you know, chairman of an institution that, for instance, supports our Italian entrepreneur, our Italian export company around 180 markets, where a large part are not easy markets. It's not only USA or French or Germany, but I don't know, Congo or Ethiopia or, you know, South America and again. That's, you know, I'm confident about the strong culture of the contractors, not only Italian, and the bank system. Maybe could be an opportunity to establish, you know, international consortium, not only with the Italian contractors, because, you know, what is important, this is an opportunity not only for Italian company, but for all the international investors. That's why, in my opinion, PNRR is a sort of a new offer that, you know, Italy offer to the market, not only to the Italian, you know, Italian entrepreneur. Then, you know, I'm quite confident. I'm in light of this, together with Francesco, we was last weekend to Chernobyl, where we was parts of this fantastic, you know, red carpets. You know, we learned, you know, many information about super speakers. And of course, we had the occasion to meet the actual Minister of the Public Administration, Mr. Brunetta, that say there is a great projects in Italy to simplify bureaucracy. They have, I believe, the next 23 of September, there is a contest to engage 60,000 new people in the public administration that have over 25 years. Young people that could be used in the public administration because they are digitalized nature. You know, they can, you know, give a sort of boost to the public administration because there are, you know, fantastic people, but maybe, you know, in line with the age like me, of course. And that's why, you know, there is a way where Italy will go, because, you know, PNRR is a sort of contract between Italy and Europe. Europe will deliver money only if we do in place reforms. That's why those reforms are important parts of the you know, execution of the plan. That's, you know, at the end of the day, you know, two things. I'm confident about contractors, culture of project finance and project bond, opportunity to make international consortium, and, you know, the next steps from Italy to simplify bureaucracy and involve the young people in the public system.
Thank you very much for this note of confidence and reasonable and substantiated optimism that I would say nicely complements the vision that was shared initially by Casa dei Depositi. Thank you, Rodolfo Errore. Thank you very much, Paolo Calcagnini. It's time to move on to the, we can make a short round of applause. Yes, of course. Let's move on with the next step of today's discussion. We have already, including the opening statements, a number of very important items which have been put on our table. You have just added a couple, such as creating international cooperation or coalitions, addressing to markets, creating strong contracts such as the one you've just described, right, with Italy and the European Union. This probably can be repeated, that chains of related contracts to implement change. There were also a couple of very interesting remarks in the chat and in notes, such as what about artificial intelligence and digitalization, whereas Europe is sometimes seen as lagging a little bit behind as compared with the US or other countries, China or other regions in Asia. So we are also dealing with those issues in a context of course, global cooperation, but also global cooperation. So let's address now those issues about infrastructure financing instruments together with Carla Ferrari, Chief Financial Officer of Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, Fabio Pamoli, Veronica Vecchi is online, right, from Bocconi University, and Davide Ciferi from the Minister for Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility. Welcome, welcome all. So, infrastructure financing instruments. Carla, you are with Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo. You are involved very much into both analyzing the crisis, finding responses, but also investing in those responses. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon to all participants, and it's a pleasure to participate in this very interesting debate, especially from the point of view of an institutional investor. Just to start with some points, qualifying points, I would like to refer to the crucial issue of the cost of transition that has been already mentioned. And I would like to say that it's well known that the sort of revolution we are, a revolution in terms of environmental and digital transition we are preparing for, requires a huge amount of money, a huge amount of financial resources. It's estimated indeed that the actual cost of the two transitions, both environmental and digital transition, amounts to around 3,500 billion euros by 2050. That is to say, five times greater than the European recovery plan as a whole. So it's a very huge amount of money, and we need to find a way to fund this kind of cost, because what I want to say is that if you have a high level of cost, in other words, you have a high level of investment opportunities. And I think that the transition, both environmental and the digital transition, need significant investment both in the economic sector that has been mentioned, like the telecommunication, transportation, energy, and so on, economic infrastructure sector, and in the social for infrastructure sector, life, healthcare, education, justice, and this kind of different sectors. So a huge amount of money that has to be invested in order to support a sustainable growth, fighting against something that has been already mentioned, against the in social inequalities that the pandemic has raised, challenging the social, facing the social challenge that has been determined by these social inequalities, these asymmetric consequences of the pandemic, and trying to find a balance between the investment and the other benefit of the investment in terms of social and environmental effects. To be clear, the energy transition, like that also the digital transition, have to be managed in a way in which they do not deepen further the social inequalities, because we have not to forget that, for example, there are a lot of important climate change mitigation measures, let's say a reduction of pollution or reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, very important point, but at the same time, this can impact in a very negative way the most vulnerable people. So this is the point, starting point. We have to keep in mind that this is the context that we have in the after pandemic phase. Now, I think that long-term investing has never been more appreciated and important than today. Today, we need, as I said, to invest in the social and economic infrastructure in order to stimulate the recovery. So this is a point I wanted to stress. I think that the infrastructure are important investments just because they are able to stimulate a sustainable recovery. And it's quite important because this recovery has to be obtained through an economic growth that has to be smart, sustainable, and inclusive. Smart, in the say that it has to be based on knowledge and innovation. Sustainable because it has to be able to use the different natural resources in a very efficient way, and then has to be inclusive. Inclusive means that that's to reach a sort of social and territorial cohesion. So now we can talk about which is the role of the finance in this new context. I think that the finance, I mean the private sector, the private financial sector, from my point of view, has to play a very important role in this transition and in order to fund the two transitions. And can play a very important role also in, for example, in defining in a very efficient way the new climate change policies in order to be able to obtain results in the long run and over the business cycles. So taking into account the fact that the fact that the infrastructure provision has always been under the responsibility of the public sector because of the strategic relevance and also because of the impact of the quality of life in the society. Now it's time to understand that the traditional investor, the local and national government have been in the past, they are unwilling or unable to do it alone. So I think that the government, they need to involve the private sector. They already did, but now after the financial crisis is more evident. And as it's been stated by Mr. Errore, it's very important now to find a good combination from the two sectors, private one and the public one, in order to create a multiplier effect. I strongly agree on this point of view, and I think that it's absolutely necessary to go in this direction. But if we think that there is this necessity, we have to answer, first of all, to the question, why should be an institutional investor so interested in investing in infrastructure projects, both economic and social infrastructure projects? Which are the reasons why an economic player like an institutional investor would be interested? There is a lot of reasons to justify that and to understand that, and this is part of the answer to the financial instruments. First of all, I would like to mention that an infrastructure project is a non-cyclical, long-term, illiquid investment able to offer to the investors stable, predictable, longer free cash flow. And this is very, very important. This is one of the most important features of the infrastructure investment. In addition to that, you have to take into account that thanks to these steady cash flows, an infrastructure project can take on a higher relative higher level of leverage, and this is the multiplier effect that this kind of solution can bring. On the other side, there is other important features of the infrastructure investments, but I think that now we have to take into account that on the other side, for an institutional investor, it's important also to tackle the question of risk. Because is 1 minute, okay, risk. There are a lot of risks that we have to discuss. I mean, in addition to the typical market risk, that is to say, business risks or macroeconomic risk, interest rate, and so on. There are the regulatory and the political and technical risks, particularly affected by the infrastructure sector, because infrastructure is not only physical, but it's very often a physical project, and for this reason is located somewhere. And the political dimension, the local dimension, and the role of the public administration are fundamentally in order to create the good condition for investing. So you have to offer regulatory certainty and to certain clear rules and transparencies, and also competencies, because these are the most important essential part of component of correct investment environment. And without these elements, it's quite difficult for an investor to find a good reason to invest in also in this kind of projects. I understand that I have to stop, so I'll take my other suggestion for the next round. Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Just one question before we move on. A quick question is, Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo is one of the major private foundation in Europe. At this moment, how would you say the COVID-19 crisis has impacted the way you look at the support to sustainable projects? Is it also a game changer for the foundation, for the way you support projects, or?
I think that the way in which we support project didn't change, because probably we are more we focused on and we pay more attention to a certain project, especially in the healthcare sector, in the educational sector, and so on. But our attitude is to increase our capacity to invest and our capacity to play a crucial role for our territory and for the transformation in positive way of our territory. I think that Compagnia has a crucial role and launch a very important impact finance platform in order to have a crucial role in this period, just to face all this problem coming out from the pandemic, the social inequalities, the difficulties to reach the same level like in the past in terms of products and availability of different opportunities. But this platform is totally open and is the result of interaction of 3 different pillars Compagnia is able to put in the scheme. That is to say, the passion capital, the sustainable impact innovation, and the mix, the high level of competencies. So we have 2 important components. So ones are the financial resources, and on the other side, also the competencies. Okay.
Thank you very much. During the rest of our discussion and exploration, and I will turn to Fabio Pamoli, sorry, in a second. We are talking about infrastructure financing instruments, and you've been perfectly clear about a number of requirements. I would like not to forget that in the background, we are talking about changing and rising social inequalities, right? Something that is happening. And another dimension, also in the background, it's not the core of our discussions, but also in the background, the question of how these investments can also support the achievement or the delivery of the 2030 agenda or of the sustainable development goals. So are they dimensions which are vanishing? Are they the core? If we can think about that while further discussing. Fabio Pamoli, you are a professor at the School of Management at the Politecnico di Milano. You have also responsibilities at a European level regarding strategic investments. What is your experience and your vision about infrastructure financing instruments to respond to the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis? The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. I will try to address a few remarks, trying to focus on one starting point, which is the coevolution between markets and states, which is evolving. And what we are talking about is a new, I don't know if it's conceptually new, but to the extent that the scale that we are observing and the speed of change that we are experiencing make it, I think, a turning point. In terms of the new alliance or the new relationships that we are trying to design between states and institutional investors and states and markets to promote the development of sustainable infrastructures in different domains. So this is an important point, and this comes with new metrics. This comes with challenges for the public administration across different member states. This comes with challenges in terms of coordination and in terms of requirements and standards that need to be accepted and shared. For example, just think about the important achievements that have been made and reached in terms of the standards in order to launch new green bonds and new green financial instruments. There is a kind of a continuous process of interaction between different actors. Some of them are member states, some of them are sovereign national entities, and some of them are, interesting enough, market actors that take into account, for example, the role of externalities into their own decision process, into their own evaluation procedures. Coevolution between markets and states means also path dependency. That is to say that states approach this turning point starting from different initial conditions, because the way in which markets and states co-evolved is specific to member states. The institutions, most of the relevant institutions have been developed at the level of member states. For example, let's stay at the European level. So if, for example, if I compare Netherlands with Italy or France in terms of the architecture of the co-investment architecture or the co-investment platforms, or even the way in which the entire process and then the balance sheets of the different actors are designed, is completely different. How to combine these tendency towards coordination and homogenization with the reality, which is basically a reality made by different member states in terms of the different financial architecture, in terms of the procedures, in terms of the way in which the public intervention has been designed and sustained over time. So, for example, the role of guarantees at the macro level, not only at the micro level of specific programs and interventions. Implication number one is that for sure, the European Commission and the European Investment Bank have been playing a very important role, raising the bar in terms of the metrics, raising the bar in terms of the standards, having the national promotional banks and the implementing partners somehow exposed to common trajectories in terms of the requirements that they need to fulfill in order to present projects and to present good projects that then have an opportunity to get funded there. And this is a very important process which is happening. And also the way in which the negotiation for the recovery plan has been happening in the interaction between the European Commission and member states, even if not directly related to financial instruments. This activity that has been performed by the European Investment Bank and now by the European Commission is promoting somehow convergence across different member states, across different configurations of the relationship between states and markets, which are relevant in order to get infrastructure investments and common criteria and common standards evolving across different member states. There has been a positive experience in the interaction between the member states and the European Commission during the preparation of the recovery fund, again, in terms of alignment on standards and requirements. However, there is an important point that I want to emphasize. There is a kind of a pendulum between grants and financial instruments. And I think that now the pendulum is obviously going into the direction of grants because of the liquidity which has been generated by the recovery, because of the stimulus plan, but also because of the general financial conditions that somehow bring a new perspective on the sustainability, on the long-term sustainability of public debt across European countries. I think we need to be aware of the importance of a balanced approach. I think financial instruments are conceptually a necessary complement to grants. And I think the way in which member states will approach the trade-offs and the decisions and the cost-benefit analysis and the way in which they will design different lines of intervention is going to be critical for the future sustainability and for the future of economic growth across member states. So this is a very important point. Practically, that means that member states should perhaps promote cabinet units being in the position of analyzing what to send to grants and what to send to financial markets and to financial instruments with kind of an articulated and well-structured set of indicators and criteria in order to analyze the additionality of different lines of investment. I'm not referring only to the specific projects or programs. I'm now thinking about the overall architecture of the public intervention in different member states. And so the crowding in can be designed at the macro level, and then it needs to get implemented at the micro level. And on this, I think, again, and I'm going to conclude with that, that the convergence, which is in the process of being induced, I would say, because InvestEU is starting now. Nobody is talking about it because of what I was saying before, because now the recovery plan and the grants are on the scene, and basically nobody is somehow considering it as a priority. But in the next 10 years, financial instruments and the way in which member states will be able to implement a balanced approach in the relationship between grants and financial instruments is going to be a key point for institutional transformation and convergence across member states.
Thank you very much, Fabio. You raised an important point, which is kind of aligning strategies, aligning the strategies of the member states. Not just having the instruments is one thing, implementing them and making sure that they are like a good, smooth flow of discussions, either within a country or, and especially at EU level is very important. And I don't think that Veronica Vecchi, who is a professor of long-term investment and PPP and financial management at Bocconi University in Milano, and who's online with us, will disagree with that. But Veronica, you are about to publish, you have just recently finished a very large book about those questions. In particular, I was fascinated by the exploration which you did about all ESG rating system, which in itself is an industry within the industry of infrastructure systems. with that, how is your vision of the issue of not just infrastructure financing instruments, but how this can contribute to sustainability and recovery? Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And I'm so sorry if I can't be there with you this afternoon, but actually I taught my course on long-term investments and public-private partnerships till 2 p.m. So I was not able to take a train on time. So thanks very much indeed for your question. Actually, let me say a few words about public-private partnerships. From my perspective, and I'm a professor of public management and public policy, I do believe that there's still a lot of confusion among institutions, among policymakers, investors, about what is a public-private partnership. And of course, this has also a great influence on the data regarding this market. So it is not strange to hear confusion between PPP, privatization, asset sale. So for example, if you want an example, you can easily have a look to the consultation paper that was issued by the UK Treasury late in 2020, as well as the answers that came from the market. Basically, this was a consultation paper to understand how to overcome the PFI model. Well, I would like to recall, especially in the European Union, the legal framework is quite clear. There's the procurement and there's the concession. And so it is obvious that if we wanted to attract private capital and in context in which privatization is not an answer. So I heard that one of the big issue is social infrastructure. Of course, the concession model is the reference model, especially with the reference to social infrastructure, but not only to social infrastructure. We know that PPP has been applied with some big issues. High barriers still exist, which have prevented the diffusion and the consolidation. Of course, PPPs are a complex contract. The level of uncertainty typical of long-term investments, we have discussed about this, is another issue. We have to consider that this is an oligopolistic market, and therefore sometimes it is quite difficult to create value for money and affordable contract. However, I do believe that the question is about if PPP. The question must be about how PPP. Based on my recent studies about especially the application of PPP to healthcare infrastructure, I think that it is fundamental to create a strong interplay between policy goals, institutions, and of course the institutional context and contract. So far, PPP has been used by the public sector merely for macroeconomic goals, meaning the off-balance sheet argument as well as the pure financial additionality. Now it is clear, and so in this way I try to answer to your question that there's a great shift of the market towards ESG, sustainability, value creation, and a strong commitment for the achievement of SDGs, which in some way represent a sort of institutionalization of the public value. And therefore, it is now clear that the achievement of public value is no more just the responsibility of the private sector, but it is also true that we really need a strong policy, a strong commitment from governments to use such solutions to develop not only brownfield projects, but also greenfield projects, and especially in social for social infrastructure. Then, of course, we need a good ecosystem. Some examples, of course, blended finance mechanisms are important, and you have already talked about this. At the very beginning, I said we need better data to support decisions in the public sector, as well as to attract investors. I remember that a couple of years back when I was attending some G20 meetings at the OECD in Paris, one of the flagship projects of development banks was the data initiative. I think that it is urgent and salient to understand how to put forward this data initiative, because it is fundamental to take a better informed decision. Then, of course, we need more skills. Someone earlier was talking about the role of supporting units. Of course, supporting units are important, but we need to understand what are the governance, the institutional and the organizational settings of such a supporting unit. A supporting unit is important to create and put forward a pipeline of projects, but we can't disinvest in more skills in the public sector at local level, because the local level is the level in charge of contract executing. And based on previous experiences, we know that contract execution is fundamental. A contract is strong not only if a contract is complete, but also if it is implemented in the right manner, if penalties are put in place in order to really create a strong mechanisms for what? For the achievement not only of just the delivery of an infrastructure on time and on budget, but now the issue is to create value to the society. So that's why it is important also to craft contracts that are not just looking at the achievement of value for money. This is the old paradigm of the new public management. Now it is important to create contracts that, of course, are efficient, are affordable for public budgets and taxpayers, but they have also to deliver value for people. And so, going back again to your question, sustainability. Now we see that, of course, there's a great shift in the market. Corporations are struggling to embed ESG, SDGs in their strategies. There's a big discussion on how to monetize, how to quantify this kind of sustainable efforts by corporations. There's a huge and bold regulatory framework, especially at the European Union level, but I'm not assisting to the same effort in the public sector. The procurement, also traditional procurement, I'm not just talking about public-private partnerships, are too traditional. The public sector is really striving to behave as a sophisticated buyer. So that's why it is fundamental to have a strong policy that creates incentive for public authorities to develop infrastructure investments that incorporate the principle of sustainability. We can't ask to the market to behave in a sustainable manner if the public sector never raises the bar of sustainability. So these are a couple of ideas, but again, I think that so since this is an international panel, I think that we really need to invest in a data initiative, and we really need that also the public sector at local level, despite the PPP unit or a specific task force, the entire public sector must take bold decision, and we need to reinvest in the skills of the public sector. However, let me say a final comment.
Yes.
I work quite a lot, not only on scientific papers, but also on real projects. I support development banks, public sector authorities, and I see that also in the private sector, we have quite a limited competence in this field. So that's why I think that we need a real and deep co-evolution between the two sectors if we wanted to achieve such bold goals of closing the infrastructure gap with sustainable infrastructure by leveraging on the innovations available in the market.
Thank you, Veronica, for being a convincing advocate of changes to happen both in the public and private spheres to meet the need for changes, but also to make a better use of available tools and processes. Probably we would need another conference like this one to question whether the COVID-19 crisis marked the end of public management and other theories, especially in the field of infrastructure yield management and others. But as for today, I will turn to Davide Ciferi, and you will understand quickly why Veronica had to speak before Davide, because she raised a number of issues which I think Davide, as a member of the Office of the Minister for Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility of Italy, Enrico Giovannini, a number of the questions or challenges that have been raised will probably raise a number of remarks or questions from you. The floor is yours. Just for the keeping a look about the time, we will finish this session 10 minutes later than initially scheduled, but we will try really to keep the rest of the flow of this afternoon running and finish on time. Davide, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicola. Let me thank for the invitation l'Istituto Affari Internazionali, la Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, il Collegio Carlo Alberto. It's a real pleasure to be here physically to discuss such important topics with colleagues and friends. So thank you. Yes, a lot of questions in this panel. I would like just briefly raise another point regarding the current role in the staff of the Italian Minister for Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility, regarding the process of designing the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. I think that in the recent years, especially at the European level, there are several steps have been done towards a more efficient and effective market for sustainable infrastructure financing. And this is mainly for three factors. Of course, there is a broad consensus at the political level. You mentioned the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the corresponding 17 SDGs, but also Paris Agreement are only two of several pillars that are describing this new political and strategical scenario regarding the need to rethink our economic growth model in order to create a more resilient and sustainable framework. The second point, of course, is the increasing attention of market participants towards elements connected to sustainability, in particular ESG elements and domains. And the third point, that is basically as a consequence of the first two, is the need of a research of a constant, a progressive rethink of market regulation regarding, in particular, standardization of information on the qualification of sustainable activities and investment. Especially at the European level, as you may know, the attempt and the proposal of the taxonomy regulation basically create a benchmark at the international level. And why I'm talking about the regulation, the European regulation regarding the sustainable activities and the taxonomy. The reason is that basically the taxonomy has been designed as a market mechanism, as a market incentive. Basically, the idea is to create a standardization of information and qualification in order to better understand which activities can be considered as sustainable. And through this mechanism and metrics, basically we have a market segmentation. We have green activities, green investment versus brown investment. And this can create, of course, a right balance, a more efficient market, because of we have the possibility to exploit the better information. We have a clear incentive for market participants, and at the end we have a better allocation of financial resources. And this is true for the private sector, of course, and this is true also for basically institutional investors, but also financial intermediaries. But now this new framework is also true, and it works also for public sector, because according to the regulation of the Resilience and Recovery Facility, that is basically the mechanism is going to finance the National Recovery and Resiliency Plan, this condition or this assessment, according to the principle of European taxonomy, must be applied to the projects and the reforms included in the national plan. And this is basically a crucial turning point. Why? Because the public sector in the planning stage must assess the impact of the projects included in the plans in a coherent way with respect to the principle of taxonomy, in particular with the principle of do not significant harm. If you know a little bit the structure and the framework of taxonomy, basically the taxonomy is based on three main assessments. After the definition of the 6 priorities at environmental level, according to the strategic priorities of the European Union, basically we have 6 objectives: mitigation and adaptation to climate change, circular economy, responsible use of water, air pollution, and the prevention of biodiversity and ecosystem. According to these 6 main objectives, basically the taxonomy, the regulation of taxonomy say that to be considered as sustainable, one investment, one activities must satisfy 3 elements. The first one is the contribution to one of these 6 elements. So must verify to produce an incremental step towards the achievement of this target, of this objective. The second point is the so-called do not significant harm principle. Basically, the investment must not produce any negative impact on the last 6 objectives. And at the end, we have the assessment for ensuring some minimal safeguards on the social dimension. Well, if this is the scheme, each investment included in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan for each member states must satisfy this principle. And this is quite a change in the way the public administration and the public sector has designed public intervention. And through this, according also, you basically raise a question regarding the ability of infrastructure investment to reduce, for instance, social inequalities, but also to give a contribution to the sustainability other dimension of 2030 agenda. In this way, of course, the conditionality of the intervention is strictly linked to the objectives regarding, for instance, the climate dimension, the climate crisis. Just to give you some numbers of this, considering both the European resources and the national ones, the Italian Ministry of Sustainable Infrastructure and Mobility, basically, I mean, the investment under the responsibility of our minister amounts about 62 billion, of which more than 70% are dedicated to climate targets. And this specific link to climate targets is one of the main components of our portfolio, and is strictly connected to the general strategy of the Italian government at the European level to tackle the climate change issues and to contribute to a more sustainable resilience recovery path for the future.
Thank you so much, Davide. This has been very very clear. And I was thinking when you were just mentioning climate targets that maybe another challenges for future infrastructure investments was also biodiversity. I think it was noted in the beginning by President Profumo. So it's all about both recovery, transition, and governance structures and financial instruments, which you can see we are circulating in all these throughout all these dimensions. And of course, this question of the local level, which is about regions, which is about cities, which can be about other ways to consider the local level, which is also floating around, right? Unfortunately, time is running short. And I would like to thank very much Carla Ferrari, Fabio Pomoli, Veronica Vecchi, who is online and has stayed with us, and Davide Ciferi. There was also some notes in the chat, in the question. This will be maybe for the end, looking towards Ettore Greco with the EIE and the T20, because there are several mentions about what about the G20, what about emerging countries, what about lower income countries, and some frameworks which have been designed in the development working group about sustainable finance and etc. This is not the objective of today really, but I think we cannot skip that completely. So maybe you will consider addressing those aspects in the end. I know, Carla, you had also additional examples, concrete examples, such as innovative battery financing systems and other strategies. Maybe Alberto Anfossi, who will be also give a closing series of remarks on behalf of the Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, can address those examples. Again, Veronica, Carla, Fabio, and Davide, thank you so much. Let's go towards now our next panel. A round of applause for each of our speakers. So let's move towards our second panel of today about financing resilience, a new business model for sustainable infrastructure with 4 speakers. Raffaele Della Croce from the OECD is with us physically. Come with me, Raffaele, because our colleagues otherwise, Tofika Hokwe from the World Bank Global Infrastructure Facility, Fast Infra, she will tell us exactly what it is about. Vincent Cassagne, who is partner and investment director at Vauban Infrastructure Partners. And last but not least, Peter McGoldrick, senior economist at the European Investment Bank, are all online. So let's continue our discussion. Tofika, if you allow me, I would like to start this second panel together with you, because we have been diving very precisely in a European context, and with the World Bank, you are one of the core specialists of the Global Infrastructure Facility and mechanisms designed to push investment. This was launched in 2016 with the G20 in Australia, in parallel to the Global Infrastructure Hub, so pre-COVID-19 crisis. Do you see any consequences of the COVID-19 in the future development of the work and finance of the Global Infrastructure Facility? Tofika, the floor is yours for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Nicola. So just to maybe introduce myself, I'm Tofika Hok. I am with the Global Infrastructure Facility, which sits within the World Bank. And we, the space we are in, we sit really in the middle of key actors in the infrastructure space, including governments who are owners and bring infrastructure projects to the market or look at raising financing, developers and financiers who provide private financing. And I think in the earlier session, there was a mention of the investment gap that cannot be met with public financing or DFI financing, and hence the need to tap into commercial financing and, if possible, long-term institutional investors. And maybe Vincent Cassagne will speak about this a bit later. One of the key challenges is related to having bankable infrastructure projects, as we call it, which can meet, on one side, the public sector needs of having efficient infrastructure services, and on the private sector need, from the private sector's point, investments that are investable in the sense that risks are allocated properly and that returns are ensured for the private sector. And this is the space that the GIF has been working in on helping emerging market clients with MDBs, together with MDBs, in structuring infrastructure investment opportunities. And we are a global facility. We work across 7 different MDBs, and we have what we call also a panel of advisory partners, which include leading institutional investors, as well as project finance banks that are invested or looking to invest in infrastructure in emerging markets. Of course, already institutional investors in developed markets is a complex subject, as we have heard a bit in the previous session. While there is a perfect match between the long-term liabilities of pension funds and insurance funds and the long-term nature of infrastructure assets, there are a number of issues that we still need to mitigate, risks that the private sector is not willing to take on, given the heavy nature and some of the heavy risks that infrastructure projects carry, including long construction, long gestation period where there are no returns that are being earned, as well as various others. So it's already quite difficult in developed markets where you have AAA counterparts like the government of France or Canada or Australia. The challenge at emerging market level, where the counterparts are most often below investment grade, is a difficult market, but an attractive one, since the investment needs are so great. And until COVID-19, we had countries that which were demonstrating year-on-year strong growth and stability, which are key elements to safe returns. So on your question of COVID-19, and we have actually had a very good year at the GIF despite COVID-19. And by good, I mean we have had 3 of our investments that we had been working and preparing that came to the market in the midst of COVID, and that got very competitive bids from the government's perspective with very solid investors. One of them is the Sofia Airport of Bulgaria, and the 2 others are ports in Ukraine. The Bulgaria Airport, the lead investor is Meridian, and the Bulgaria ports, we had the Qatar port on one side, and I believe PSA of Singapore on the other port. So very strong investors coming in the midst of COVID, looking for solid assets of projects that were well prepared, and going back to my term of bankable, including, and for us, bankability includes issues of sustainability, not just environmental, biodiversity, social, but also governance, and also in terms of affordability and long-term viability of the project, and the long-term commitment that the governments will be able to honor the long-term commitments that they are making from the public sector side into those projects. So
yeah, Tofika, if you hear me, just quickly, one question. You just mentioned that
yes.
the question of bankable projects, and maybe I will come back to you, but we will can continue from here. You can answer this question very briefly. Traditionally, in the infrastructure spheres, the issue of the lack of bankable projects and the abundance of potential funding has been regularly quoted in the past years as being one of the big problems, even bigger maybe than the alleged an enlarging finance gap. With the COVID-19 crisis, would you say that there are more potential bankable projects due to the support funds? We have had the example of the European Union earlier in the afternoon, or that there are even less bankable projects? And linked to that, and I'm also raising this question for Raffaele, would you say that there is more support or less support in real regarding complicated infrastructure project that sometimes cannot enter easily into the pipeline of bankable projects?
So I have to start by saying that infrastructure is a very, it's a long-term business in the investment side of it, in the operation side of it, but also in the preparation side of it. So yes, we are already in the 2nd year of COVID, and we are all hopeful that this is the end, but who knows? So this is not, we're not doing working capital financing. We're not doing, I don't know, we're not even doing a hotel or a tourism project. Here we're doing projects that take on average in the preparation side anywhere between 2 to 5 years to prepare, with technical, legal, environmental due diligence that are significant. We're talking very large projects such as airports, water systems, ports. So I don't think we have yet seen a direct impact on the project preparation side. On the investment side, that's a different question. I mean, projects such as investments such as airports, ports have all gone through significant, a lot of them are at workout levels at the moment. But to your question of, are there more funds available, less funds available in the emerging market space, which is my space? There is, of course, there has been, all of this work is typically funded by MDBs, donors, bilaterals. And of course, everybody's purses are very constrained, and priorities have been shifted towards responding to COVID, not just in outside countries, but domestic needs. So there is a bit of a dip in the availability of funding for new facilities that are coming up or new initiatives that are coming up. But there is still a lot of projects that are being prepared who were already in the pipeline of preparation. We have at the GIF, we have about 104 projects that we are preparing at the moment. And we are adding on to those numbers on a very regular basis.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Was very clear. Raffaele Della Croce, you are a senior economist at the OECD and a senior fellow of the long-term investment think tank here at the Fondazione Collegio Carlo Alberto in Torino, and you are also a co-chair together with President Profumo, myself, of the T20 Infrastructure, Finance and Investment Task Force. Regarding what Tofika has just mentioned and these questions of new business models for sustainable infrastructure, where are we nearly 2 years or 18 months after the COVID-19 crisis has started?
First of all, let me thank you, Compagnia San Paolo, President Profumo, and Valeria and Fulvio, who have been working over the last months in the T20 context, the Istituto Affari Internazionali, and Nicola, the great work has been doing, and Collegio Carlo Alberto, where I had the honor, and Professor Garibaldi, where I had the honor of being a senior fellow. And I think the fact that we are here today is not a coincidence. The role of academia supporting this policy agenda has to be there, has to be vocal, even stronger than it is at the moment. There is more need for evidence in this discussion and the challenges that we're looking at. My take, the work I've been developing in the G20 context for the OECD has been very much focusing on private sector financing and long-term investment issues. So that is the take I will give to the business model you asked me about, Nicola. But before getting to there, I think the principles about what are we doing, in what direction are we moving, and what is the international policy agenda, how is that shaping, how it's been, where we're coming from. So first of all, I think we all agree that change is needed. Is not on the margin that we're talking about, it's really about the system. And so here the model, talking about what is the right model. There is an opportunity, is the recovery plan, of course, is the digitalization opportunities that we have, is the long-term investor push to actually look for long-term investment issues such as ESG. This systemic change requires community acceptance. So it's about the social license to operate. And this is not a vague concept if we see how difficult it is for many projects to get into the ground and get public support, and how that is key and vital for public and private sector to be in this area of work. This is not happening. So this is the first point, the starting point, I think, getting to what are the solutions. 1/3 of funding is wasted along the process, not even reaching the projects, according to the IMF. If you look at the OECD service on institutional investors, the annual survey we run, looking at 70 trillion of assets under management, less than 1% is directly invested in infrastructure. So here there is a problem of inefficiency, capability of governance. There is not a lack of financing, that is clear. But there is not implementation phase is lacking. Money is not invested, it's chasing the same assets, and the market is overheating at the moment. What is the G20 doing about this? Where we're coming from? So this agenda about private sector financing has been there for years now, for a set of years. It's been first pushed by Australia, is about infrastructure as an asset class. How investors would choose on a risk-adjusted basis infrastructure towards other opportunities they face in the market. Quality infrastructure, that has been a new sort of branding of the G20 initiative under the Japanese, and Nicola, you know very well because you've been involved as well in this discussion. It's not just about infrastructure, more infrastructure, it's about quality, certain type of infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure. And they came out with some principles very much aligned with the ESG sort of work and the taxonomy, the discussion we're having. And this year, the COVID situation, of course, the Italian presidency of the G20, putting resiliency on top of the agenda for infrastructure, maintenance as well. What is the state of existing infrastructure, how to preserve what we have, and how to build in a resilient way. And what are the business models then, getting to your point. So the new model from a conceptual point of view has to integrate these different concepts, I think, which have been running in parallel sort of discussion and agendas. The nature of infrastructure as a service, not just investment, and infrastructure as an asset class. The investors take into infrastructure, looking at returns and social implication. And uncertainty, the uncertainty we are facing in the current world, the complex system of infrastructure, which requires another approach to build resilient infrastructure. I can go more in the detail of your question.
We can certainly, thank you very much. It was crystal clear. And what we can see together with you and Taufika is kind of real state of the situation, right, regarding infrastructure, because it's not just about the infrastructure world, right? It's also about capital markets. And we can see here that the logics are not necessarily consolidated. This is maybe for the closing remarks, another issue and another message to convey from this conference at T20 level and further to the G20. I'm also keeping from you the issue of inefficiency and capability, and this striking figure from the IMF, which is you just reminded us of, that is about 1/3 of infrastructure projects fund is sort of lost, right, on the way, and that probably has not changed much since the COVID-19 outbreak, maybe even the opposite. So Vincent, I'm turning to you, Vincent Cassagnes, because when you are kind of a practitioner, a stakeholder in the business of long-term infrastructure finance, right? How do you view, first, maybe a brief comment on what was mentioned by our sort of institutional partners today, the World Bank, OECD, and how do you see the main challenges, the main barriers to overcome? How do you deploy solutions to keep a business of long-term investment running in the conditions of now? Is it about like successful new business models or other features? Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you all for being invited to this event. I'm not here in person, so finally, instead of using one traditional infrastructure airport, I used the one which is very inefficient, fiber, which is hopefully working pretty well. I'm saying that because we have both in our portfolio. Hopefully, we have more fiber than airports. That was not a bad choice, looking at what happened with the pandemic situation. But joking apart, I agree with what have been said just by Rafael, by Taufika. And very quickly, in 30 seconds or 1 minute, I will just present Vauban as a partner, so know what we're coming from. We are an investment, we're an asset manager with 6 billion euros under management, and we invest in equity in infrastructure projects, providing social services. Our mandate is to invest in new city countries. Actually, we mostly invest in Europe, in several countries, including Italy. In Italy, we had a chance to enter some assets, one district heating in Mestre, which provide heat to the Udine hospital, one of the hospitals of Mestre, and finally the one of Milano, one of the Nicaragua. This one has been done last year, so in a complicated situation. For all the health world, but also for all the infrastructure in general. To answer to your question, it's not the COVID pandemic situation. It's not changed dramatically our way of investing, but it confirms some of the key features of our investment strategy. So we are investing in four big sectors, four vertical, in telecom, so digital infrastructure, as I said, transportation, very broadly, social infrastructure, and what we call the energy and utilities, taking into account district heating, cooling, or energy system. One of the key features of our investment strategy we started in 2014 is investing with long-term brownfield funds, which are 25 years funds. Now this feature is gaining momentum among the infrastructure funds because it's match well both the balance sheets of our investor, which are insurance company of pension funds, but more importantly, it's matching the needs of the stakeholders and especially the public authorities. And what we think about resilient infrastructure, for me, it makes me think about three concepts. First one is essential infrastructure, so an infrastructure which has to be legitimate, which has to provide good services to the customer, to justify the costs which are implied. That's why we are including also ESG very soon in our investment decision process, and we're also continuing during the life of the assets in asset management. You can also have a link with the ESG contribution of an asset. But at the end, it's very important. Raphael mentioned the social license to operate. That's very key. If you want to be an investor on the long term, you have to take into account the true needs of all stakeholders, so users, taxpayers, public authorities, industrial partners, shareholders. So everyone is important, and investing in the long term means that you cannot just enter, make strong profit by reducing heavy costs and not thinking about the future, about the state of the infrastructure which has to be maintained. That's not possible if you are not exiting in the 5 or 10 years. It relates for the second concept, so essential infrastructure being stakeholder-centric, and this long-term future ensure an alignment of interest. It's important before decision of constructing a new infrastructure, but this important is also, it has also to be renewed all along the life of the assets. Again, the asset has still to be legitimate. And the last aspect is adaptation. Adaptation to the need of the users, adaptation to the climate change, and also adaptation to the new technologies. And when we think about new technologies, of course, we first think about a new way of communicating that we do today. So we think about fiber at first, but all the traditional infrastructure are impacted by digitalization, either as a risk or either as a tool to better maintain or better answer the need of the users. COVID situation, so we have proof that infrastructure was resilient, but of course you have to see sector by sector. And I see that you have a question.
All right, Vincent, thank you very much for sharing your visions. I would say that it was also a wise pre-COVID choice to have more assets in digital infrastructure than in airports at this very moment, or airlines. That you have a kind of diversified portfolio, which include hospitals, right? Especially in Italy. And it's also interesting what you refer to ESG, right, as being part of also overall criteria. We have seen before, especially I think, if I'm not very wrong, Veronica Vecchi from Bocconi, who said that those factors maybe were not so much important when it comes to shaping future dimensions of would say, global infrastructure investments. There are other factors. Vincent, we will get back to you. Thank you very much, because we would like to hear from Peter McGoldrick, senior economist with the European Investment Bank. Peter, when we prepared for this conversation, you mentioned the sort of engagement and the overlook of the the EIB was looking both at a European level, but also considering very seriously the issue of the local dimension of infrastructure systems and investments, etc. When it comes to new business models for sustainable or resilience infrastructure systems, how would you describe the situation now in Europe? What are the main hurdles, the main challenges, or the main factors for positive change? And what about this local dimension we have been touching upon several times? Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm delighted to be here. As an economist, obviously, I am not a frontline practitioner. Maybe what I do is I just briefly talk about the EIB and how it is transforming in the current context. And also then based on our municipality survey that we talked about, which gives us some idea about the local needs and obstacles facing municipalities in Europe, some lessons that we have learned from that. So just about our institution, the European Investment Bank is the EU investment bank. We help with investments looking to close in on public policy goals. These include green and cohesion transversely, and then we have sort of pillars, innovation, infrastructure, environment, SMEs. With the European Green Deal, and as the EU Investment Bank, it behoved us to come along with that and to proactively engage in a transition to become, with the EU claiming this priority for itself, to become the EU's climate bank. And so, as all of us have mentioned today, we need to adapt our model, and global warming is a global and complex issue, so partnerships are tremendously important. For the EIB, translating this ambition to become a climate bank for the EU and its ambitions meant becoming concrete, meant being methodical, and trying to hang ourselves or bind ourselves to goals that are commonly meaningful. So we started this essentially with a review of the energy lending policy, which we brought out in 2019, and then we published our climate bank roadmap. Now, this is a major milestone because it tells us how we are going to move forward in supporting the EU Green Deal, and there's also the EU recovery under COVID-19, but also beyond Europe. And so, for instance, our aim is over this decade now to support 1 trillion in investments in climate action and environmental sustainability. We have far to go, but we are already Paris aligned, and in addition, we're looking to increase our volumes in climate action and environmental sustainability from 30% now of our volumes to 50% of our volumes by 2025. And so the Climate Bank roadmap, we are this year bringing out, developing a lot of important aspects that will be guiding us forward. So we're looking to accelerate the green transition. So that includes supporting technical innovation, and here we will be bringing out an adaptation plan, so also for climate change adaptation, how to engage with that. We will be bringing out a transport lending policy. On the just transition side, because everybody is affected differently, and the economic risk for this transition for certain areas is perhaps higher than for others. And so with this in mind, we are fully engaged with the EU's just transition mechanism, and shall be bringing out also a just transition plan to respond to these needs. We are supporting Paris-aligned operations. This means that what our climate bank roadmap does, it operationalizes the EIB group alignment with the goals and principles of the Paris Agreement, including an rapidly evolving, increasing shadow carbon price, as well as the alignment of our counterparties, for which we have methodological assessment tools that we are developing. On strategic coherence and accountability, we've just closed a consultation on the EIB Group's environmental and social sustainability framework. So it closed on 6th of August, and so we have to go through evaluating these kind of things. Perhaps to say, when we talk about resilience and adaptation, we, as our president mentioned recently, we have sort of three areas that we want to come forward with, and these areas are to use robust climate data to support our clients in developing resilience to climate change, and so that's smarter adaptation. We also want to engage with the private sector to bridge the financing gap. And we will support inclusive growth and create economic opportunities. So these just briefly, perhaps a few points on to engage, to respond to your question. What do we see? We assess things at the project level in a context, of course, and we have various public policy goals, including green and environmental. But we also have to pay attention to cohesion, for example. And so if you look at things from that point of view, through this lens, you get different capacities and needs in different areas. So what the municipality survey shows us, for example, is that investment gaps are real and are felt. And even albeit, as been said, the world is awash with liquidity, perhaps, the major financing obstacle or the major obstacle for investment is financing. And the second and third ones are related to regulatory red tape, very important. Also, we're talking about common standards and implementing the regulations that we commonly want to refer to, as well as technical capacity. And this is all the more important when we're talking about new types of technologies that we want to further. So technical capacity is a major issue for all institutions trying to implement this, for everybody who's trying to meaningfully tie themselves down to goals, and for investors who want to target the areas, these type of areas. I can expand if I can't hear you, but I think you want to say something.
Peter, thank you. If you allow me, on these issues, you've, in a nutshell, mentioned these just transition mechanisms, and then the technical capacity to manage the tools that we have been describing earlier today in the session, which do exist, right? And on the other hand, issues, I think you were perfectly clear on that, as well as Raffaele, public community acceptance, right, of changes that are going on and which are also key, not just market mechanisms and sophisticated financial mechanisms and procedures. Going back to that, Raffaele, what Peter was mentioning was especially true at EU level with the European Investment Bank, right? When it comes to an OECD-wide perspective or even a G20-wide perspective, how is it this question of a just transition and the related mechanisms? And you have been also involved in this infrastructure conversation for several years. How are we in the very context of the G20 this year? What are the main challenges that are still not clearly put on the table, maybe, and that ought to be a few weeks ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit?
Well, This connects to my previous remarks about thinking infrastructure not just as a physical infrastructure, but thinking about as a service, and that is another dimension where you need to include public acceptance, community involvement, and of course, in this context, the implication, the impact of externalities is key, and social justice, social dimensions among region disparities between urban and countryside. This is key and is topical for the recovery package, the funding that we're receiving at the moment, countries are receiving at the moment, how this is going to be spent, what are the policy objectives, and how to be sure that at the implementation phase, then the money goes where the policy objectives were stated in the first place. This is a new process which requires new governance systems, and I think is still to be found the right model which is going to work. Of course, we're looking at different best practices across countries. In this discussion, I think having this long-term investor, long-term view does help, and is typically what institutional investor would bring to the table. So including them in a discussion about these issues definitely steer the discussion towards long-term issues where you need to take account of all these social dimensions that we've been talking about. What probably I would complement to what was said before in terms of getting the right model is a supply sort of blended finance, a sharing mechanism, risks. But the starting point has to be where are the sectors we are aiming and what is the role for institutional investors in the first place. Knowing that in certain sectors, although this is, as we say, is marginal, in certain sectors, we've seen a positive development. So the good stories are out there, and renewable sector is one good story. We know that the need is there. According to IEA sustainable development scenarios, we need to double the investment by 2030. And that was not even accounting the latest projections. McKinsey is saying that by 2030, there will be 1.6 trillion of new investments in renewable available to investors. So that is the frame through which investors' patient capital could have a role. It's not necessarily risky as new technologies, hydrogen or so forth, which is also needed for the transition. Is a tested sort of technology. There's been a learning curve in terms of from the investor side, and we do have good sections, a good share of equity investment now taken directly, even in the greenfield phases, from financial investors, institutional investors. So I think this is a good story. We know that these trends pushing investors towards diversification will be there over the future. It's about the aging of the society, is macro dimension, is regulation, is the allocation, financial market trends from banks to institutional investors. So that is a scenario that we see keeping on, connecting to the infrastructure sector that we are not there yet, but probably building on these stories and targeting the right demand that we want would fine-tune the instruments which are already there in many cases. This blended finance discussion, guarantees are not new. This is about where do we calibrate the right incentive for private sector to come in without crowding that out. And that goes back to value for money consideration, evaluation, project appraisal, which are on the value for money side and also have social implications. Something that in Italy they're working on, as Davide said, but everywhere is needed, and we're looking at good practices across countries. Probably the last point on this would be the role of academia, which is what probably started this, and I'm very, very passionate about this. There is a complete lack of data and evidence. Literature on these topics of ESG is nascent. there are a few sectors where you can start your analysis. So renewable sector, energy sector is a good one. You can see the last decade of returns, how that compared to fossil fuels returns, and how that is actually not even returns are getting higher, but volatility is lower. So it's actually the investment proposal is very much there for investors. And how to expand this to ESG factors. That means having more data, more transparency. This is, I think, is a common interest from public and private sector, where I do see the G20 having a role. And it was mentioned by Veronica before, this G20 data initiative is something which was trying really to connect different efforts to put some evidence and a common language together, something which is missing. And initiatives such as the EU taxonomy in Europe is actually pushing us towards.
Thank you. Thank you very much for reminding of this aspect of that data in the system. Last round of comments from all you three online, Vincent, Peter, and Tofika. So who would like to start? I know each three of you have an additional comment to make. So who would like to start? Tofika, maybe?
Thank you, Nicola. I actually wanted to come in when earlier Peter and I think Vincent also mentioned the systematically using ESG frameworks in reviewing investment opportunities. I think, you know, the GIF, we do sit in the World Bank, and I have to speak on behalf of the MDBs, EIB included, that ESG has been core to all of our investment decisions. And if you look at the Equator principles that have been adopted broadly by project finance banks, international ones, even more regional ones these days, are principles that were based on IFC performance standards that were developed back in the 90s. So it's been there for an institution like ours. We don't look at an investment without looking at it from an ESG angle. Yes, the commercial economic aspects are critical, but ESG is one of the key due diligence factors. I think what we're seeing these days is actually quite promising. It's no longer ESG, or this session is about resilient infrastructure or sustainable and resilient infrastructure. Those issues of safeguarding, protecting, as well as even contributing positively to ESG elements is no longer the purview of NGOs, which it was in the 70s, or MDBs in the 80s and 90s. We are seeing a real shift and a real interest from investors to look at ESG, not just from a CSR angle of making sure that their assets do not run into problems in the communities that they're being developed, or do not run into more risk, but really on looking at how you can combine making investments and doing good at the same time. And definitely, I think the renewable energy, the push we have seen in renewable energy, the solar and wind projects have demonstrated that you can combine those things. So one initiative that the GIF is involved in and that we have been co-chairing is called the Finance to Accelerate Sustainable Transition, FAST Infra, something that was launched 2 years ago under actually the French presidency, of inviting private sector investors, saying, we all have these commitments on, everybody's talking about climate and resilience. What can the private sector do? So this coalition is really a coalition of institutional investors, banks, developers. Alongside, there are MDBs that have come on, but we're really a minority party there. And we have been working together at coming up with several solutions. One of them is that we have been leading on together with HSBC and Macquarie, is developing a sustainable infrastructure label. The idea being that we look at sustainability at the preparation level of an asset and at an asset level, not at the financing level, which has been really the green bond, the sustainability linked bonds and loans that are out there in the market, and that have flourished enormously in the past 10 years. So here we're taking a view of really coming at the design, the planning and design stage, and bringing the different parties that I was mentioning earlier, government, investors, developers, and financiers together, and building assets from the looking at those aspects of environment, social governance, as well as adaptation and resilience angles.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fast infra, not just financial projects, but assets also level. Vincent, maybe on this aspect, the financial project, the assets, and how they combine that when you are a long-term investor. Really short, I would just ask you to really be very brief because we are nearing the end of our panel discussion. Vincent, the floor is yours.
Of course, but integrating the ESG, I will come back very quickly on that. 5 years ago, when we were an investment manager and raising fund, it was potentially a plus, but it was sometimes even a drawback toward ULPs because they would think that you will reduce your level of return or you will reduce your number of opportunities you can look at being that. So it was not always a plus. It's changed dramatically for the past 5 years, but it's not so long time ago that that changed. Now you cannot do a new financing without including some green financing or sustainability linked loan, especially if you are in the oil sector. I would say, but just for the joke, you cannot so invest without taking into account ESG metrics. Of course, there is some which are just starting now, but here at Vauban we are doing it for many years. But now it's a must-have. There is also increasing number of label, also initiatives towards standardization. We are part of the GRESB initiative, for example, which is one of the biggest in infrastructure investors. Because which is an interesting feature that has been launched by the private. But there is others also which are also interesting. It's a little flourishing as well. And finally, there is also regulation. We talk about the EU taxonomy. There is also the SFDR classification. Our funds are under the Article 8, to give you an example. This is coming very fast now, and everyone has to position itself on that aspect.
All right. Thank you, Vincent. Coming very fast, everyone has to position itself. Peter, is it really coming that fast, or at this moment is it just about disruptions and coping with massive announcement, and this will be the final word for the discussion at the moment? Peter.
Thank you for the last word. Let me just briefly say that indeed I think things are moving very, very quickly. And let's focusing on resilience. Climate change adaptation is really a complex issue. Awareness is still developing. I think it's developing very quickly, but how it immediately affects everybody, it's not always tangible. Recent events have probably contributed to bring this more to people's minds, but still for others it still remains abstract. So this is one thing. This translation is a public sector issue to bring about, and not only that, but everybody within a country, globally within a country, everybody's exposed in a different way in coastal regions in the north of a country compared to a southern. So here, policy responses need to be quite flexible, and not only that, they need to respect a certain amount of understanding, a certain amount of hierarchy of needs. The lesser developed areas need to develop some things more than others, and so this is a compromise, a trade-off. Trade-offs have to be made, at least in the short term. Then optimizing the value-added function. So we want to stop climate change. So climate change mitigation is an important, or is the main thing. But then when you're talking about resilience, you've got adaptation. And the ideal amount, when you are speaking as an economist, when you're optimizing, then the amount of investment you want to do in climate change adaptation, this is a function of how successful we are going to be in mitigating climate change. And this in turn feeds into the risk premiums. And we don't have a long sequence of actuarial information to base ourselves on. So this again is a source of uncertainty, and I think this may well be developing quite quickly. From this point of view, we certainly need a spectrum of financing. Different actors need to come together. This is why I started my intervention with saying it's a global issue, complex issue. We need cooperation and people coming together to manage the life cycle of long-term investments, and also to decide about how much adaptation and modification is required for our investments. The municipality survey shows that there's growing awareness and it's accelerating quickly. And also when we ask municipalities, what are you focusing on doing? Of course, new build is something that they are looking at, but adaptation and modernization of infrastructures is one of the major issues that they have in mind.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Peter. A round of applause for Taufika Hoke, Raffaele Della Croce, Vincent Cassani, and Peter McGoldrick. And I will now give the floor for a couple of closing remarks to Alberto Anfossi, and then we will give the floor to Ettore Greco as Executive Vice President of EIE, and also, I would say, co-chair of the T20 Italy. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So let me start by thanking you, Nicola, for the moderation of the panel and the introduction, and all the speakers who accepted our invitation and offered such a qualified contribution to the debate. Let me just once again thank the Collegio Carlo Alberto for hosting us, the EIE Institute for co-promoting the event with us, and within Compagnia di San Paolo, I would like to thank also Dr. Russo Perez, head of the Fostering International Opportunities Mission, who kind of created this infrastructure within us, which is the link with EIE. All those who followed today's conference in person or live streaming. Well, the policy recommendations produced by the T20 Working Group on infrastructure are of enormous importance, and we are aware of living in an historical phase of transition. The economic growth cannot be achieved without assessment of long-term impact. I think this is one of the key points that today has been highlighted, the long-term impact and the environmental and social sustainability of all the undertakings in infrastructure. For our foundation, for Compagnia di San Paolo, it has been an honor to co-guide the task force workflow, identifying the guidelines for the infrastructure of the future. The adoption of a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development model is a challenge that involves a growing number of players, and we are among those players. And I think that today we learned how there are some kind of paradoxes. For example, the fact that we can estimate the funding gap while we see and we have listened that in real life there is a lack of pipeline probably, and you have the capital there, but the difficulty is actually not in theory to sketch projects, but to have real projects with all the elements that we are discussing, and so the sustainability issue, the innovation issue, the attention to impact, in particular social impact, to overcome inequalities and not stress inequality, the quality in the design of the project. We can think of the funding side of in the design quality, and we learned about that in many of the today's contribution, but also in the implementation phase on how projects are carried out and delivered. I think that other key concepts are the one of competencies. needed in designing projects, in deliver project, but also in measure project. So the metric used in particular when it comes to ESG and SDGs, and not be kind of social washing, but be real on that, and to have a standardized and unified set of metrics. But also the insights on real world told us and taught us what is working and what is not working at the moment. And this, all of this, I think, is particularly important for Europe, which can receive a boost from the infrastructure to become the world's first carbon-free area. For Italy, where 62 billion euros have been devoted to sustainable infrastructure, mobility and logistics by the National Recovery Plan, and also for our region, Piemonte, in particular for our town, Torino, who desperately needs to fill the gap in infrastructure, actually. We, as Compagnia di San Paolo, are trying to play a role on that. Of course, the scale is the local one, but it can be also a model in opening new paths. And in particular, I would like to mention two projects. One is an investment we realized recently in the field of batteries for mobility, so car batteries, where what convinced us was the fact that with the shape of a startup, they're doing industry. So they were very rigorous in the value chain, starting from the energy production, the construction, but also the commissioning phase, designed since scratch. So this is something that is European, funded in Europe, produced in Europe, and will find the market in Europe, and which is rather interesting as a model. But then we decided an investment in a fund which is promoted by one of the companies in our ecosystem. It's called Equiter, and Carla Ferrari, is one of the speakers of today, is the CEO of this company, who promoted a fund with a target of 500 million euros. Which I would say with the slogan, ESG and SDGs taken seriously. So the fact that you is an infrastructure fund, funding infrastructure, but since the beginning, the concept of funnels, so the funding funnel, the sustainability funnel, is paired with a innovation funnel and a impact funnel. So the fact that at the end the project ending up the three funnel will be, we believe, a real improvement for our society. So as you said, as one of the leading foundation in Europe, we want to operate as impact generator, and we are ready to do our part to achieve long-term growth. And as the claim of our philanthropic foundation says, to the common good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And for the final words of today's discussion, Ettore Greco, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Nicola. I think we have had a very rich and articulated discussion, which has offered a number of insightful analysis and a variety of different perspectives. I would like to thank all of you again on behalf of the Institute of International Affairs, our panelists, for their outstanding contribution. I would like to remind that our declared goal was to discuss the problem of infrastructure, of sustainable infrastructure, from a long-term perspective. So going beyond a purely short-term approach. I believe our panelists have indeed addressed all of most crucial long-term issues that need to be considered to ensure the sustainability of infrastructure. This is also the type of perspective that the G20 itself is focusing on. I have taken a lot of notes, and so I think have my colleagues from the institutes that are perhaps dealing with the infrastructure issues more deeply than myself. But I don't dare now even to try to summarize our discussion. But let me emphasize a couple of points that have been at the center of our discussion, and perhaps are worth deeper consideration and further analysis, including within the framework of the G20. And indeed, I'll also mention some dimension of the infrastructure problems where perhaps, and now actually, the G20 can play a significant role, as suggested by Nicola and also requested by some from the audience. So I would like to recall that our point of departure has been, of course, the huge gap which has been widening between the growing infrastructure needs and the limited resources that both public and private investors have been able to provide. The whole discussion on the future infrastructure revolves around the new ways and means to fill this gap, which is particularly serious in the developing countries, but also, as we know, affects the more developed ones. And Professor Garibaldi, also Dr. Srce reminded us that there has been a down trend in the capital investment in Italy for many years. So even from this perspective, the pandemics has essentially accelerated existing trends. And linked to this, a crucial problem is how to address the short-term need to sustain the ongoing recovery, which can be seen from some perspective as potentially fragile, at the same time pursue the long-term objective of making this growth more sustainable, as stressed in particular during our discussion with Dr. Ferrari. There has been a natural tendency to give priority to the protection of existing economic structures, while now the focus should be has been increasingly on the potential transformative effects of infrastructure investment as part of a wider effort to promote a transformation of our economic systems. An appropriate theme for the G20 in this regard are the synergy that will be established between the big infrastructure plans, such as the US investment plan, the Next Generation EU, and the Belt and Road Initiative itself, despite, of course, the geopolitical problems we know very well. Professor Profumo reminded us that the Next Generation EU in particular represents for us an unprecedented window of opportunities. And as emphasized by Dr. Calcagnini, investment decisions regarding the new types of infrastructure are particularly complex. He underlines that we would need new assessment instrument. He raised the problem of technical expertise of public administration in this regard, and expertise we need that of course in many aspects is lacking. This is a point that's been raised several times from different perspectives during our discussion. But turning again to the European dimension, it's clear that we should see this the new instrument we have, thanks to the EU Next Generation, should be seen as a potential powerful tool to achieve the type of economic convergence that remains for the whole Europe, and particularly for Italy, of course, an extraordinarily important long-term objective. Fundamental issues are the new financial tools and regulating framework that we need to establish two big infrastructure plans in line with the other crucial objectives of the global governance agenda, including the fight against climate change and energy transition. The adaptation of infrastructure plans to the UN Sustainable Development Agenda is a key component of any long-term prospects on the future of infrastructure investment. We know, it has been stressed several times, that this adaptation will be certainly painful, and as we stressed a couple of times, it is not easy to build the needed popular support in this regard. It must be recalled that this objective was at the center of the principles of quality infrastructure investment approved by the G20 under the Japanese presidency in 2019. Even here, however, there is a problem of the balance to be built, to be struck between social and environmental needs, and several speakers have emphasized. More broadly, and this is a key point, the G20 has an important role to play in the discussion and identification of rules and principles to promote, manage, and regulate infrastructure investment. This is the problem of taxonomy that many have raised several times. This is indeed part of the principle and standard setting role that the G20 has increasingly been able to play in a number of sectors. This so-called, what I would term soft norm setting role of the G20 is often underestimated, while it has become, in fact, one of its most important functions. And it's important also to stress, to be stressed in particular in the final session, there has been a certain promising convergence on some principles that originally were promoted by NGOs and civil society organizations are now increasingly embraced by institutional actors. The other big issue at the center of our debate has been the use of digital technologies to improve infrastructure, to make them more resilient. The application of new emerging technology to infrastructure development can be a crucial enabling factors for ensuring infrastructure sustainability and resilience. There is a clear need to accelerate the pace of this process in order also to meet the other strategic objectives of the global governance agenda. At the same time, as we know, investment in infrastructure can play a prominent role in fostering economic recovery by boosting digital transformation. So this can be or can become a virtual circle. Our debate, I think, has shed light on how the changes associated with digital technology can affect the infrastructure sector, on the main challenges and opportunity this ongoing rapid technological transformation presents. The other closely connected issue is the role of digitalization and data-driven advances in ensuring efficient monitoring of the various stages of infrastructure life cycle as an essential risk preventing process and to avoid disrupting postponement of necessary infrastructure maintenance. There has been indeed a growing emphasis at various levels on maintenance of the existing infrastructure. This is a dimension where digitalization and progress in the collection and elaboration of data can make a big difference. Data are also essential, as has been stressed several times, to support and facilitate the difficult investment decision that needs to be made. This field, data collection and management, is another field on which the G20 agenda has paid growing attention. The identification and discussion of best practices within the context of the G20, working groups in particular on various technological issues, has been one of the most promising activities of the G20 process, in particular to the extent that it is linked to the effort I have mentioned to set standards and principles of potential global value. Another last issue of paramount importance on which the panels have placed a strong emphasis is the global dimension infrastructure development. Dr. Ferrari illustrates in particular the various reasons why the local dimension is so important for infrastructure investment. The choice of the Italian government to give prominence in the G20 agenda to the long-term sustainability of urbanization and the mitigation of the infrastructure gap between urban and rural areas is, of course, in line with the priorities of the wider sustainability agenda. This is a new theme for the G20 to some extent, and I think it's been a merit of the Italian governments to introduce it into agenda. The challenge is how to best take into account the needs of local community, involve local actors in the early and successful stages of infrastructure process, but also how to make a proper assessment of the impact on infrastructure investment plans on local communities, and how to best use the potential of local communities and their comparative advantage. This also implies overcoming the various barriers that block financial flows to local projects, and the role of both national governments and development banks, both national and international, can play in assessing the risk of projects, promote best management practices, and facilitate new forms of public-private investment. The functional synergy that can be established between the policies of national government and the programs of development banks is certainly another themes on which the G20 can provide useful suggestions and guidelines. And hopefully this will be also included in reflected in the final document that will be approved at the G20 summit at the end of October. So these have been only some of the very important issues discussed today, which again, I think has been very rich and stimulating. It will be now our task, the task of our institute, of course, in close cooperation with the Compagnia, to disseminate the results of the conference, and particularly make them available and known to the experts and officials working for the G20 presidency. So many thanks again, all of you, for being with us today, and special thanks to our panelists, the Collegio Carlo Alberto for its kind hospitality, and the Compagnia di San Paolo, which has been indeed the driving force behind this endeavor, and its thanks for its continued encouragement and support, all the Compagnia team, Valeria Lauria, Fulvio Berzanetti, and Francesca Contini, and on our side, if I may, Nicola Bilotta, Giorgia Santamaria, and Elisabetta Farroni. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ettore Greco. These were the final words, and here we are closing our G20 roundtable on financing sustainable infrastructure, a long-term perspective. Thank you very much in Torino and online, and have a good afternoon or evening or day. Thank you very much.